Then we move on to the case study. So how do you actually apply the standards in the self-assessment tool to a case study, which is called Seed and Co. So basically, we introduce this case study. We'll use it's a hypothetical case study exploring some typical impact management decision making at the enterprise level. It's a case study, it's fictional, but it's still based on a real life scenario from a company that was operating in West Africa. So, and then here you have number 7. So 7 is step number 7 in the diagram, the framework that I showed you before, which is about how do you develop an impact measurement and management system framework, where you have the following 11 questions. So firstly, you have what are the sustainability risk and opportunities? These are the impact goals. What are the solutions? These are your actions of your company. What are the resources required to allow you to implement those activities? And then you have the so-called measurement questions: the who, the what, the how much, the duration, the contribution, and the value. As you can see, these questions are how these questions appear on the so-called logical framework, where you have input, activities, output, outcomes, and impacts and value. And then you have the questions: what impacts are most material, and that means relevant and significant in terms of contributing positive to sustainable development, and what are the risks that the impact might not be achieved as expected? What are the consequences to those experiencing the risk if impact are different from what was actually expected? Okay, this slide shows that the social value international standard, which is compatible with the impact management project's dimensions, the 5 dimensions, the who, the what, and so on. So the request that an appropriate sample of people are involved in order to better identify the who, help you define the what outcomes, and measure the how much change, and help you establish the actual value. So basically, one of the key takeaways from the training is, of course, that more data, more insight. The more data you have, the more insight you have, the more options you also will have. So by answering all of the 10 impact questions, it can seem very overwhelming at once if you haven't done this before. But each data point will actually help you to understand your impact much better, and it'll give you more options for optimizing impact, and of course help you make much better decisions at the end of the day. Sorry. Okay. And also, the Seed and Co are basically quantifying each impact with collected data collected directly from their stakeholders. There are different ways to collect data. One way is to use surveys, and the numerical data will then help represent the amount of change caused by this company's action. It will help you estimate the importance of change, that's the value, as expressed by the stakeholders along the value chain. And much of the data, as you know, particularly if you do a survey, is of course going to be subjective data. But the message again is that no data, some data, however subjective it might be, is fine, because some aspects of well-being are very subjective. So a key point is that data is better than no data, and the process of involving stakeholder builds accountability, and data can maximize value for each stakeholder group. Other key points are that most decisions are being made right now with no impact data. Having some data and knowing its limitation is the very first step in the right direction. And one way to improve the comparability of impact data across your stakeholder group is to use money as a proxy for value of changes in well-being. It's not perfect, but as you know, there's no perfect science for valuation. Another key points are that businesses make decisions with low rigor data all of the time. Managing risk required data with appropriate rigor to inform each decision. The SDG impact standard is a decision-making framework which allows for different levels of rigor, and the external stakeholders may want to see the data that supports decisions. In this instance, there should be transparency of the data that you're using and transparency of the risk and limitation of the data that you're using. And in order to get a better understanding of that, we will recommend the participants of our training workshop to do a deep dive in Social Value International's a brochure called Standard on Applying Principle 8, Be Responsible by Social Value International. Then lastly, about the independent assurance. So you have the so-called standard voluntary independent use. So the standards are designed to be used as a best practice guide. You've seen the self-assessment tool, which can also be used to undertake the gap analysis, as I showed you on the Excel sheet, and as a guide to prioritize actions, fill gaps, and improve practice over time. So an external assurance framework and the so-called SDG impact seal that you will get is really developed to support the adoption of the SDG impact standards. The assurance will be done by third-party accredited assurers. So that means that after you have received your certification, which is a signal to the outside world that you're fully committed to sustainability, sustainable development, the SDG goals, if you want to keep the SDG impact standards seal, you will have to subject yourself to an independent evaluation done by independent consultants that will come and visit you. Usually it will be every second year. That gives credibility, not that anyone is trusting your own self-assessment, but in order to give even more weight to the data and valuation coming out of this exercise, it's important, just as is important with the financial assurance and financial reporting, that non-financial reporting is also being undertaken by independent assurers. So the requirements to get the SDG impact seal should satisfy the requirement of the United Nations Development Policy on due diligence and partnership, with the private sectors having to meet a minimum evidence requirement and commit and demonstrate continuous improvement.